Okay, other area that local authorities work in, and again has almost have fallen into this area more than anything else to support people living with their support, is the area of mental health. And in Galway County Council, this has been addressed with a housing disability steering group and a mental health subgroup within that. To tell us more about that particular project, we'll please welcome the Senior Social Worker for Housing with Galway County Council, Kieran Keown, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi everyone. I'm not sure how this works, but I'll... Green button. Okay. My name is Kieran Keown, Senior Social Worker in Galway County Council. I suppose I'm relatively new still to local authority setting. Prior to that, I suppose I would have started my career in child protection and then adult safeguarding and then in disability mainly for about 14 years. And I was Principal Social Worker in an organisation called Ability West in Galway before I joined the local authority. Disability, I suppose, affects everybody. It affects every family. It affects every person in the community. So it goes without saying that within housing, we're going to be working with a lot of individuals and families and situations and services around disability. So I suppose from my point of view as a social worker, I suppose most people here might be very worried if they had a social worker coming to their front door. That's a myth. We work in a lot of services where it's very much a supportive piece, an assessment piece as well. So I suppose in Galway, our strategic plan for housing people with disability, it's underpinned by the national strategy. I suppose today I'm talking a bit more about the operational side of the mental health subgroup. But actually, the strategy is an overarching piece. The definition of disability is very broad. Within housing, we categorise that under disability mental health, disability physical, disability sensory, disability intellectual, and I suppose we also within sensory we have, people with autism, and so it's very, 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 very broad. And I suppose within Galway County Council alone, out of all of the applicants, there's probably 700 to 800 people that are categorised under disability. So it's quite significant piece of our work. So I'll come back to that again. I suppose the biggest category within that though is mental health, in terms of people that are categorised as having a mental health disability. That doesn't capture the amount of people who actually have a mental health difficulty. In terms of, I suppose from a social work point of view, we work with, traditionally in the local authority, it would have been kind of traveller specific work, but in Galway we have a broader base of referrals. We look at all individuals who may be applicants or tenants who may have a need or may have additional needs that might be referred to our service for additional input and support. But under mental health, I suppose the numbers are quite high. And also in terms of existing tenants, we would have a lot of, in terms of tenancy support, our housing liaison officers would refer many people for social work input who may be, due to their mental health deteriorating, their tenancy might be failing, they're experiencing various difficulties in their lives, or they have experienced something. They might have been fine for 10 years and something has happened, and there could have been a bereavement or whatever it might be. So I suppose it's very complex. But as part of our strategic plan for supporting and housing people with disability, under that strategy, we decided to set up various subgroups to kind of look at each kind of category and kind of hone in on, obviously we can't address everybody's issues or support everybody's need, but it's about looking at the priorities and like complex cases so that we can actually work through them and progress them, whether they need housing or whether they need alternative housing or whatever it might be. So with mental health being the biggest cohort in terms of applications and people who were maybe already in tenancies but that needed maybe alternative supports, we decided to set up a mental health subgroup first. So we set that up about a year to 2 years ago, and it's evolved. But I suppose since then we also have a subgroup with partners and stakeholders for intellectual disability service providers in Galway, and also physical and sensory with the HSC. And we're looking at setting up another one kind of more with the kind of more autism specific stuff as well. So it's evolving and it's become a big piece of what we're trying to do, and I suppose the operational side of that is a resource from us and also from the HSE largely and the service providers. So the Galway County Council Housing Disability Steering Group, it allows for case discussion at a broader level. That's with all of the kind of the I suppose that's a quarterly kind of meeting, and we're kind of have obligations under the housing agency. So that's where we kind of make sure we're adhering to the strategy and all that. But the subgroups are where the real work happens, I suppose. It's operational. We're talking about cases, we're talking about clients, we're looking at their needs, and we're trying to identify action plans for each person that we're trying to progress through the system. Because traditionally what would happen is there's always kind of a them and us. It's like the local authority and the HSE, and the HSE aren't doing enough, and TUSLA aren't doing enough, and we're great. But when I worked in the HSE and TUSLA and all that, it was the exact same. The council weren't doing enough, and I can't get anyone to ring me back. So the whole point of this is just to try and bring people together and have a shared commitment whereby we can communicate. And if a housing liaison officer comes to me and says, I'm shortlisting for Joe Bloggs, there's a disability requirement, but I don't know what it is. I don't have any information. They're on the housing list for 10 years. Anything we have is old, but we need to know in the next week, because otherwise we need to move on. So somebody could be very close to getting a property, but because the information isn't up to date, they may miss that opportunity. So I suppose through our disability strategy and subgroups, we can have points of contact with the relevant service providers. We can very quickly get the information that we require. We can get the information, we can make an assessment promptly, so that person potentially will get an offer of housing or an alternative or a transfer, whatever it might be. So it allows for the development of action plans and bridging the gap between the local authority and the HSE. So as I say, the subgroup and the mental health subgroup in particular, it has, we have a shared, I suppose, kind of vision as to what we need to do, and a shared responsibility. So it's not, we leave a meeting expecting one person to do all the work. We have to all do a bit of work. So that works quite well. So our membership of the Housing Disability Steering Group, Mental Health Subgroup in Galway County Council, we have 4 core kind of functions, but then we have additional people that we ask to join depending on cases as well. So myself and my colleague, Senior Executive Officer, the Housing Coordinator in the Mental Health Services, HSE, and our Housing Liaison Officers. So our Housing Liaison Officers cover 4 areas of the county. So we have a very efficient meeting where we meet for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. The Housing Liaison Officer, say for the West, joins for maybe 15 or 20 minutes for people that we need to discuss with them. So we keep it kind of rolling fairly tight. I suppose we try and bring in as many people as we can depending on the client's needs and the service provider that might need to be involved. The HSE Coordinator for Mental Health I'll talk about in a minute, because that's a key piece to all of this as well. So since this started in terms of the subgroup piece and prioritising kind of complex cases, we've supported about 52 people to date. Of those, 12 were supported to transition from mental health hostels to independent tenancies with support. For those of you who don't know what a mental health hostel would be, if you're familiar with maybe like homeless hostels, it's social care, kind of maybe care assistance supported services. They wouldn't be ideal for long-term kind of living. That kind of model of residential long-term group living, it's congregated settings effectively. So it's to really try and support people to have their own tenancies, because one of the key pieces to any of us having positive mental health is having a secure home, a secure base. Everything else kind of filters out from that. So if that piece isn't there, that foundation isn't there, then we're just, pushing against the wind. It's really, really difficult. So when people are supported to move on, we can only see that their potential at that point. So as I said, the age range is huge. So we work with kind of a wide range of people. There's no limit. So the HC housing coordinator role, that role doesn't exist in every area. I know it was rolled out in some areas and it hasn't been continued because of funding. But we've been fortunate in Galway, the coordinator covers Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. Because traditionally, in my role, trying to liaise, say even in Galway County, which is quite large, there's like 7 to 8 network areas. You're trying to deal with many different community teams, mental health teams, primary care teams, disability teams. So it's really, really difficult to try and get the information or try and find the right, maybe clinical person, whether it's an OT or a physio who might be working with someone. You could be just ringing around and phoning people, and posts change and people change. So this role is a person who isn't managing any of those people, but is standing alone, I suppose, and does the piece in terms of rallying whoever needs to be contacted and getting the information. So that person being part of our mental health subgroup is really, really important, because it's kind of really changed how we operate. So the coordinator is operating at the interface between the local authority, mental health services and NGOs. So they're networking all the time, but also pulling people together, which is really good. The strategic oversight allows the coordinator to identify barriers and enablers. So we're also not getting an influx of whoever's on your caseload. That might be everyone that's important and everyone that's at you. They pull together the priorities, and that helps us prioritise who we need to prioritise. They work in partnership with myself mainly and the senior executive officer. So we just have one point of contact for Galway for the mental health services, and then following from that, we know who we need to link with on various mental health teams and so forth. So it is a partnership approach, and we have a kind of I suppose a code of conduct unwritten between us in terms of what we have to do and what we don't do. And we generally, between meetings, we meet every month. There's homework to be done, but it's always done not at the start of the meeting. We have we're dealing with real people, and we're dealing with people with complex needs, and we need to move things along, so we kind of have to take it seriously. So our ethos, I suppose, in Galway County Council is to make a commitment to work on driving the agenda for housing for vulnerable applicants and clients, which is underpinned by our own strategy, and I suppose that's then underpinned by the national strategy in Housing for All. Our own strategic plan, I suppose, it does go into a bit more of the kind of practical stuff day to day that we needed to do in Galway. So it's there on the website, on our Galway County Council website, if anyone wants to look at it. So who does it benefit? I suppose the subgroup project has supported individuals attending Galway mental health services who are on the Galway County Council waiting list who are approaching the offer zone. So it includes people who are attending mental health services who have a housing need and do not require additional supports. So they're maybe the easier ones. Those in insecure tenancies who had previously been in hospitals, as I mentioned earlier, to transition to secure tenancies. They can be tricky because there's a lot of fear that, and even from the mental health services themselves, this person needs all of this support to move on. But actually, in most cases, they need some support, but it may not be what they were getting in that kind of institutionalized setting. Adults with severe and enduring mental health issues living with parents to transition to independent living. And there's a small number of individuals of existing tenancies whose tenancy is at risk due to psychosocial issues impacting on their mental health and tenancy. So we look at some of those as well and try and maybe look at, is it a transfer piece, is it a more supported living arrangement, but that they're maintaining their tenancy. So it allows for an interagency forum where accommodation and supports can be looked at collectively. So it's collaborative leadership. We've agreed a shared purpose. We're focusing on relationships and systems and using appropriate interventions. We're not tarring everybody with the same brush. Oh, they have a mental health disability, they have schizophrenia, they have this. Everybody is different, and a lot of people with additional needs with supports can function really well, and it's a strengths-based approach that we're trying to work from. So identifying housing need and mental health services. The coordinators in regular contact, as I said, with each team. They have their own housing need record, so they're prioritising all the time. And then when it comes to our meeting, we're looking at their priorities and our priorities, and obviously making sure people are on the list. They need to be on the list for a period of time before they can feature for an allocation. But it's a constant kind of effort, but it works. But we kind of chip away at it, I suppose. So I suppose key to implementation, and this is the operational piece that why the mental health subgroup works so well. We have key local authority staff at the table. We've ring-fenced time, and we're empowered to make decisions based on their expertise. So that's really important. Myself, as senior social worker, I sit alongside my colleague, who's senior executive officer. We all report to our director, and we have a shared kind of there's no kind of indifference in terms of authority, so we work collectively, and might have a very different opinion to my colleague who's an SEO, but we would work together to try and find a solution. So the shift from consultation to collaboration at a local level, that works really well. Understanding context from perspectives beyond one's own. What parts are flexible and what isn't? Understanding each organisation's constraints while still seeking the best outcome for the individual applicant and vulnerable client. There is no longer a bit of a they and us, and that kind of culture has changed a bit, which is good. We have a bit of respect, I think, and we, as I say, there's much better communication pathways. So again, having the relevant people there and the knowledge of our housing liaison officers. Just the second point at the bottom there, My Home Service and National TSO Service. There's structures and supports and models that the HSE are putting in place. So they're quite often with complex people coming to the table, advocating for somebody for an allocation, and if the person needs that level of support, they're given the commitment in advance in writing that that's in place. So that allows us to maybe give us a bit of kind of security moving forward, especially for tenancies for people that might be high risk in some way. So I suppose that's just more the operational piece, the accommodation and all of that. But again, it's all trial and error sometimes, and we try and work through. And again, sometimes it can come down to the geography, and there might be an offer but might be suitable because somebody who has needs to be close to their family, and they need to move back to a particular area. So we have those negotiations and bartering, but we kind of work through it. Again, the outcomes: access for individuals to tenancies that are planned with supports for mental health services in place. It's quality housing for vulnerable clients. Under Housing for All, it's the main thing. It's inclusion, it's community-based, and there are people with the label of severe and enduring mental health needs that are moving into their own tenancies with supports. They're doing well, and they're being part of a community, and their outcomes are improving, and that's what's important. And that has a knock-on effect in terms of the future resource drain that they might have on services and community services. If they have a home, they do better. Value for money and all of that. So just lastly, last slide before I run over and get something dripped on me. So 2020, I suppose the stats, we can all understand stats. There are positive stats. In 2020, 22 people moved to their own tenancies, an additional, and I suppose that larger amount is usually down to maybe when it was maybe more congregated, so there was a move of maybe 8 or 10 people at one time. So we were working on the tenancies and supports for all that to happen, and then it all happened quite quickly. So the figures are there. It's quite positive. It's still a lot of work because obviously there's lots of obstacles when it comes to these things, and sometimes it could be the person's own family who just want them to move. But we work through it, and the interagency piece is really important, and I suppose that's the key message. Okay.
Kieran Keown, ladies and gentlemen. Kieran, thank you very much indeed for that. Incredible work, and one of the things that's worth noticing as well in all of this is that a lot of these projects all happened during lockdown and COVID and chaotic existence that we all were living at that time, so the extra credit is deserving there.